Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Like we said on this show, it all depends on the time zone from where you are watching us from. Welcome to The Leader, courtesy of the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya. Today's topic is an interesting one. When a leader grieves. Wow, what a topic. And to help us unpack this in studio, we have a lady, a mother, a wife, a friend, someone who's Pamela. Familiar, in other words. Pastor Mueni, imagine I met you in a lift and you look familiar and I say, you look familiar from somewhere. Who are you? How would you introduce yourself?
I do three things in this life, and thank you for having me here, Edmund. I do three things in this life. I'm a pastor, I'm a grief therapist, and I'm an authenticity coach. What does that all mean? It means I help people navigate the changes and challenges of life in a manner that is true to who they are, in a manner that protects their dignity, and in a manner that reconnects them back to God. Because sometimes we go through changes and challenges, and they actually leave us disconnected from God. So I help reconnect that back.
You know, colors speak.
Yes.
And when people are mourning, they generally wear black. Leo mevangos are black. Are you grieving?
You know, it's interesting you say that because I have gone to funerals where people are dressed in white.
Huh?
You know, so it's not about the colors, it's the meaning we attach to color. And going by where I come from, black is not even a color.
I can tell. I can see it on your head. I'm looking for it. So let's get back to basics. Leadership and grief. How do those two intersect? Who is a leader? Where are they? And
Okay.
grief. Let's navigate around there for a moment.
Okay, maybe we begin at the basics. Yeah, let's define what who a leader is. A leader is someone who is in the place of organizing, planning, and what do you say, harnessing resources towards a vision. Yeah, John Maxwell says leadership is influence. So really, a leader is anyone who is in a place of influencing because a group of people. But it's also important for us to know that we also talk about self leadership. I lead my life. So it actually comes down to we are all leaders in our different levels because we have the place of agency. You know, I have capacity to decide what am I going to do. Think about a student who's in the university, a child who's in standard 6. You know, they are preparing for CAPSEA. They know that I need to get this done. I need to get this done. I'm going to go to the exam room. I need to get this done. So they begin to show leadership in terms of their choices, in terms of their planning, in terms of their organizing. So in general, we are all leaders. And I think it's important for us to get there because sometimes we can get so stuck on the impression that leadership is about titles. But many of us do lead in very many places without the titles.
And if
And
I hear you then, it's not necessarily elective, as it were.
no. And that's a reality for us because as a nation, many times we get so consumed that leadership is the elected leaders. But Edmund, if we're being honest, the elected leaders in this country, government, and they're what? Maybe 10, 20,000 if we were to give it that number, really maybe a figure. 20,000 MCAs, and their offices. But we are a country that has how many million Kenyans? You know, so if we only say that leadership is in the place of those 20,000, what about the rest of us? What's our role? Are we not leading in the different places that we sit in? You're a head of a family. You're a leader in that home. You're a head boy in a school. You're a head girl in a school. You run a business in the market. You're a chair of the Nyumba Kumi in your neighborhood. We are all leaders in our different spaces. You run a kiosk in a certain neighborhood. And even though all you think is, I just open this kiosk and I run it, but that kiosk has been there for years. And you're an inspiration to people who say, you know what, that man has shown me how to sustain a business over the years. So you're leading, you're inspiring, you're showing how to mobilize resources, but you don't even have a title.
Are we unfair then when leaders seem, or we expect them to be, strong, in quotes, if I may, to the extent that they are shielded? And do they even know when they're grieving at all? So, what is grief at its basic level?
Grief is defined as the normal and natural reaction to loss. Okay. And it's also defined as the normal and natural emotional reaction to a change of life as we have known it, or the emotions that arise out of a change in the pattern of our lives. Now, one of the things we need to acknowledge is that our lives have a sort of pattern, a sort of rhythm, a sort of methodology that is there. A child is born at age 3, they go to school at age at class 6, at a certain age they graduate from kindergarten, they go to grade 1, at a certain age they sit for CAPSEA, at a certain age they go to junior high school, they go to high school, they go to either whatever tertiary institution, they get a job. Once you've had a job for a couple of years, your family starts asking, when are you getting married? When you get married, they start asking, when are you having a firstborn? When you have a firstborn, they start asking, when are you having a secondborn? And so there's a normalcy. Okay, I don't like the word normalcy, but there's a methodology, there's a pattern, there's a rhythm to our lives, and that rhythm is what most of us actually follow. We've been socialized to believe that. And so when someone has been married for 5 years and they're not having a baby, even if between the man and the wife they've decided we're not having a baby for the first 10 years, we'll start asking, is something wrong? What is going on? We'll start wondering. And maybe there is a challenge, but really, there's a challenge in them having a baby, and they are grieving over that inability to have a child. And so grief is, usually when I tell people I'm a grief therapist, people usually think, who has died? Is it only when people lose a loved one? But there are at least 40 things that cause grief to the human heart. And post-COVID, that number has actually gone up higher. Things like moving from one neighborhood to another. You knew how to operate in this neighborhood. You go to this neighborhood, you don't even know where Mama Mboga is anymore. You don't know where you park because it's a new neighborhood. Changing jobs, you're in a familiar space. You knew who to ask when you need a day off. You're in this new job. You don't know who to ask. You don't know who to report to. You don't know. Transferring children from one school to another. These children have been used to a way of operation. So that causes grief in the hearts of children. In a family, a pet dies. That causes grief to that family because this pet has been a part of the family for so many years. Recently, we have had constant cases in this country where homes are demolished because of one reason or the other. Now, a home that I have built is not just mortar and brick. It is a labor of love. This is where I've been marking the growth of the children. This is the tree we planted on my child's birthday, and so to demolish that is to demolish my memories, the things that I treasured, so we grieve in very many different ways. I know we don't even think about this, but we don't, sometimes we tend to think they deserve it. But guess what? Think about what goes through the heart of a politician who has vied for a political seat and loses. Think about the emotional investment, the material investment, the energy of the campaign trail, and then he loses. Is it a wonder that when results come out, it's a very charged moment because the stakes are very high, because this has been a journey. I've invested in it. So when the results come, it almost seems like life and death. And it's a grief process when they're realizing I am number 2. And nobody remembers who number 2 is in politics. Is you go home, So even recently, and I was very, very proud of him. It really touched my heart. And a former legislator, what's his name? Kiraito Murungi. He said when he lost the elections, he was in a place of being very disillusioned and everything. He actually went back to school and went to study positive psychology to help him understand this new place he's in and how to reimagine life afresh. And for me, that is such a brave thing for him to have done, because it means acknowledging, wait a minute, losing this election meant something. And it's not just a matter of accept and move on. It's a matter of sit down, acknowledge what has happened to me. How am I interpreting it? How am I feeling about it? What has it done to me? How is it shaping me? And then he went back to school and see where we are today. He would be the perfect candidate to talk to legislators when they lose elections, or to help legislators prepare for elections, knowing that mambo ni mawili, you can either win or lose. So it's a conversation that we need to have as a nation and look at the different things that happen in our lives and how they impact us.
Are there instances when you who is going through that process, not even aware that you're grieving?
It is possible to not be aware of that you're grieving, because again, remember that we only think of grief as the big ones. You know, my mother died, my father died. But we don't think about my business is struggling. The organization I work for, we're having a merger, and now I'm not even sure what is my title anymore. Is my department being collapsed with another? Is my department relevant? Who am I anymore? Because sometimes some of us attach our identity to our positions. That is, this morning as I was coming, I was thinking about how sometimes you have, and it sounds like I'm taking you back. You have an elected leader who probably even served as a result of a by-election. So they didn't even serve for 5 years. They served maybe for 2 years. Between 1963 and 2023. But anytime you meet them, they want to still be referred to as Mheshimiwa. Because they attach their identity to that title for that season. And sometimes, you find someone who, they have been a leader for so long. They go to church, they go to places. There's people directing them. There's people leading them, showing them where to lead. But now they are no longer they did not win the elections. So now they go into a function and they don't know even where to sit. Because, oh my goodness, I used to be shown where to sit. I used to be welcomed. There used to be a red carpet to receive me. Now I'm mwananchi wa kawaida. So you see, it impacts their identity. People don't recognize you anymore. You had a big job, you had a big title, you retire, and then you go to and now you go to the bank, and the bank, you're no longer so you're just a regular person. Or you go to the airport, and now you're not being received at the VIP lounge because that VIP lounge was attached to your job and your title. Now you're retired. So please sit where regular people sit, and you're sitting there and you're wondering, what is this about? So those things impact us. You've been a mother for so long, and now your children are, you have an empty nest. Your children are all grown. They are no longer at home. And so you're going home and you're thinking, oh my goodness, what's my purpose in this house? I don't have children to cook for. What? The house is so silent. And so all these things cause us grief. And all these things cause us to feel like there is a change in the pattern of my life as I have known it.
So disruption in the patterns of life
causes grief. Yes. And so it's possible to be grieving and not be aware. Mm-hmm. Because now I'm an empty nester. I'm in fact at my place of work, I'm willing and available to, are we having any meeting late this evening? I want to stay in the office a bit longer because home is so empty, and I'm not even aware that I'm actually running away from the emptiness that is my house.
Now you're a pastor. Do pastors grieve?
Oh my goodness. If there is any people who grieve, it is pastors. Because I'll tell you this, Edmund. Many times, and we are constantly burying congregants, and we think of the grieving family, but we never think of the relationship that the pastor had with the congregant. because it's not a relationship that we talk much about, but sometimes our congregants do become our friends. And also, remember, we don't grieve over titles, we grieve over relationships. Pastors grieve. You know, my church was in Ngong Road, and then my congregant bought land in Jos Kakamulu. So they are no longer the community. So they find a church nearer Joska. And so within a short while, 10 of my congregants have moved, you know, and so I'm grieving. I lose my congregants. I've had these children from kindergarten all the way to high school, and they've been members of my church, and now they go to universities abroad. I lose touch with them. My congregant used to be available all the time, but now he or she has gotten a job that has taken them out of the country, you know. And so the pastor's heart is constantly finding things to grieve over, because there's always transitions happening in one way or the other.
You are an authenticity coach.
Yes.
When I grow up. And grief therapist.
Yes.
Do you grieve?
Yes.
Because for you to fill somebody else's cup presumes that you have something to also fill.
Yes, I do grieve as an individual level, and I'll tell you a statement that one of my clients told me. One of my clients asked me, "So, Pastor Mueni, do you grieve? Ama Weni kama cartoon? You know, cartoons don't die. Eh? They're hit by a car and they just wake up and breathe in and continue moving." But that's not true. We do grieve because in whatever level we are in, and as at the place that I am in, life happens. Life is constantly happening. I'm a grief therapist, so someone will come to me and they're telling me about a strained relationship or a conflict they're having, because I'm also a mediator, a strained relationship and a conflict they're having with their father. And you're telling me that in the middle of my grieving the death of my father. And so if I am not dealing with my grief as a therapist, I will not be able to help my client. In fact, I will be so offended by, what do you mean you're angry with your father? Do you know how much of a privilege it is to have a father right now? You know, and I will really come hard on them, because what has happened in that situation is that their emotions have mixed with my into that cup, and I will hold it for them. But if they come and find my cup is kidogo, maybe halfway, and then they pour their emotions in there, they will mix with my emotions, and it will not be a therapy session. It could easily become a support group meeting, and therefore they will not get the support they needed from me. So I must constantly come into the therapy room with an empty cup. But that also means, as a therapist, because life is also happening to me, I must also go to another place where someone else is holding space for me. So I go to another place. So every therapist must have a therapist. Every pastor must have a pastor. Every leader must have a leader. Every and we need to be very afraid of leaders that don't have a leader. Because if a leader does not have a leader that holds them accountable, that asks them the difficult questions, then it's very easy for them to go off tangent. Yeah. But if I have a leader, if I'm a therapist and I have a therapist that I'm going to and I'm pouring they will ask me, is this, are we trading? Is there a conflict between, are you still able to ethically, within the code of practice as a therapist, are you still able to engage with this client in a manner that is ethical, in a manner that protects the client and also protects you? Or do you need to refer this client and you go and sort out your issue? And so, I mean, to be honest, Edmund, when I lost my dad, for the first 6 months, I did not take any client that had lost their dad. I did not have capacity. I did not want to. I could not do it. But of course, I had to turn away those clients in a manner that does not leave them offended, but I would refer because I was not able to. At that point in time, my heart was too broken to take on such a client. But then after that, it's interesting because the same things that break our hearts can also be the same thing that heal our hearts. So after that, I found that the clients that had lost their fathers, became very dear to my heart. And I wanted to spend time with those clients because I felt that now sitting in a place where I'm discussing fathers with clients was healing to me. And the thing about recovery when we go through loss is we need to be authentic. And that's why the authenticity coach. The other reason why I use the term authenticity coach is because grief and loss cause a distortion. They distort our view of ourselves, they distort our view of the world, and they distort our view of the divine, our view of God. And so those three distortions can only be corrected by truth. The Bible tells us truth sets free. And for us to be able to identify truth, we need to be able to identify what are the lies that bind and blind us, because then truth sets us free. Sometimes because of the journey of loss and grief and the emotions that arise, we find that distortions come into our life. We begin to think, the reason I lost my election is because I'm not a good leader. The reason my husband left is because I'm not a good enough wife. The reason my wife cheated on me is because I'm not man enough. The reason my child is struggling with an addiction is because I was a bad parent. So already I begin to attach it as a distortion of who I am. And sometimes the reality is their struggle has nothing to do with me.
Let's retrace you as a person in your journey. When did you get a sense of that's where I'm going to land in terms of your career, your profession?
Um, a couple of years back, I served as a pastor in a church, and the ministry that I served in, we used to handle what were benevolence. And so I was consistently sitting down in spaces with families that have lost their loved one, families that are that have been diagnosed with a terminal disease. And yes, we would sit with them, we would pray with them, but sometimes I'd find myself wondering, am I relevant, or am I throwing cliche statements? And I really wanted, I would listen to them and I'd feel inadequate in terms of my support to them as a pastor. And as God would have it, in part of my preparation journey, I went through a deep and personal loss. I had a miscarriage. And it was a very confusing time, Edmund, because one of my questions with God was, wait, I am serving as a full-time employee of the church, and you are allowing me to go through a miscarriage when I served in corporate world.
Did you feel cheated?
I
Ask
felt
like,
very
why
cheated. I
me?
was angry. I mean, I give of my energy, of my time, and everything. And this is how you pay me back, by me
Felt a sense
losing
of
my
betrayal.
child. There was a very deep sense of betrayal. And it was in that space when I had my sick off. And when I came back, at one of the ministries I served under was our Olives ministry, which is our widows fellowship. They had invited a grief therapist. And I listened to this man. And as he spoke, my questions were being answered. And he's a believer, he's a reverend. And as he's Reverend Kyoko. And as pastor spoke, he's a military guy, big, tall military guy, knows all the stuff. But as he spoke about the griefs in his life and about the loss, I thought, I connect with that. And so we went through a training that helped us now deal with our own personal losses. And after that training, he said, there's an opportunity for anyone that wants to become a grief therapist, where now you're being helped to help others. And it connected very deeply with me, because then sometimes as pastors, The mistakes we make is we go into some of these grief spaces as God's PR agency. You're trying to save God's reputation because, oh my goodness, how can God allow a child to die? And so you go into that space and you're trying to protect and defend the name of God. But having gone through the training as a grief therapist, I learned that no, I'm not God's PR agency. I can actually simply sit with someone who's grieving and say, I don't understand myself. I don't know it. I don't know what happened. I don't have the answers. But I will sit with you and I can only imagine what you're going through. And I will sit in here with you because you're a human being and I'm a human being and I'll offer empathy. There's nothing, you see, when we go through some of our losses, Edmund, when I lost my dad, nothing, nobody could say could make everything okay. There was nothing you could say that was tweet-worthy that would make me feel okay. No, my heart was broken and continues to break even in different ways even today. But it's not you who will come and say anything that will heal me. It's me who needs to take the choice and be intentional in my journey of recovery. And so that's the space that we sit as a pastor. And now when you're trained as a grief therapist, you realize that your role is not to make things okay. Your role is actually to be able to say, the Lord gives and the Lord takes. Job said, my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. And by the time Job says that, the restoration had not happened. Sometimes it's easy to think he said that after he got the most beautiful daughters in the land. No. By the time he said that, he was still broken. And that's the thing. Grief gets us to a place where we begin to realize, what was this about? What is this journey about? It changes our perspective. And so when we sit in the spaces of grief as a pastor, and one of the most humbling things for me is to sit in the spaces of grief with clients, and for them to allow me to be with them in their moments of deep vulnerability. That's not something I enter into casually. That is a big responsibility. And people's hearts are fragile spaces. You must enter there with respect and honor and humility.
Two quick things to come through, and if we may, and you've touched in it, examples in the Bible of leaders who have gone through grief. And again, the statement that you made, if I may paraphrase, and I think it is Paul who also said, in terms of weakness, that's when
we are weak and we are strong. Grief changes us. Grief molds us. Grief reshapes the person that we are. Grief changes our perspective. Now, one of the questions that I get asked often is, but everyone goes through grief. So what's the big deal about seeing a grief therapist? We all go through grief. The big deal about seeing a grief therapist is that what we help you do is we help you get healthy coping mechanisms, because you can get all sorts of coping mechanisms. By the way, alcohol is a coping mechanism. Addictions of all kinds, whether it's behavior, gaming, workaholics, that's even addiction to church. By the way, the human mind is completely amazing in terms of its ability to create spaces and create things to which it can be addicted. You'll find someone is addicted to church. And because it's church, we tend to think it's okay. But what are you running away from? And so the human mind is constantly seeking safety, constantly seeking stability, constantly seeking something to identify with, constantly seeking predictability. You see, remember the pattern that has been broken. Now you're seeking that. And because that pattern that has been broken, maybe it's been broken in my house, I go to a place that has a predictable pattern. So my house is falling apart. But because work is predictable and the and the rewards at work are predictable. You know, we have a good month, you get a bonus. Those are predictable and those are easy. But you see, at home, when will you get a balanced scorecard performance from your wife? How do I know when I'm being a good husband? How do I know when I'm being a good father? From age 0, I'm still a father, but this little one is not able to say whether I'm a good father or not. In fact, parenting can be very humbling because you know what? When I go home, my child is not interested in Ati, what title do they call you? You they just need you to get on the ground and play with them. And I'm used to places where people recognize my title. But now this little one is throwing at me a ball. They don't respect the anointing. You know, and so parenting can be very humbling. Marriage can be very humbling because everywhere you go, they have these big lights for you. But you come home and your wife is asking you, why did you leave your socks on the floor? You know, so those spaces can be very, oh my goodness. We all want to go to the places where we are celebrated, where the lights are shining, where the accolades are loud and lights are bright. But in the places where there are no lights, there are no accolades, there is rebukes, there is correction, they see you, they see your vulnerabilities, they see your inadequacies, they see you as you truly are. Those places we tend to be a bit uncomfortable with. And yet, those are the places that we get broken. And it is also in those places that we get strengthened to actually accommodate the public accolades. So, if you're broken at home, but there is a public light, you're going to find that the 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 that celebration out there feels shallow because there's a part of you that knows there's a vulnerability somewhere. But if you're strengthened at home, even when you go into that public space and there's pain and there's shame, you know that I have a home that I can go back to and I am loved and I am anchored and I am established and I am accepted and I belong. And so that's why we say that our homes, family, is the smallest structure of a society. But if we have strong families, then we will have strong communities because everyone who comes into the community space comes from a family. If our families are doing well, then our community will do well. If our families are not doing well, then the community will go the way of the family.
I still want us to make reference to the Holy Book.
Okay.
Let's speak on leaders. Name any three.
3 leaders that grieved.
I'm not necessarily grieved, then we'll see how they dealt with. There's a point here, it's leading to get to appreciate that they're just human.
They're just human.
Solomon, David, Joseph.
David is a real grief of an actual grief of a parent. Remember when his child wasn't well and he was wearing the sackcloth, he's grieving heavily, and then the workers come and tell him, your son has died. And they're worried. Now that if he was grieving that heavily when the son was unwell, now that we tell him the son has died, kitaumana, you know? But what does he do? He stands up and takes a bath and he says, where my son has gone, only I will go, but he will not come back. Because something has changed. I mean, the reality of loss has happened. You see, when this young man was unwell, there was a hope that he can recover. But now that he's died, imagine that chapter has been irretrievably closed. We can't go back. We can only move forward from there. So David, that's one person that grieved. Another person that grieved is Job, and many times I find that we talk a lot about Job, and we often we have very negative things to say about Mrs. Job. We're not even told what her name is. But the more I read about the journey of Job, I find that, truthfully, Edmund, I relate more with Mrs. Job than Job himself, because Mrs. Job was honest and genuine in her loss and in her grief, and was going through the grief motions just as we do from a human capacity. I'm not saying that Job did not, but they were both going through the same grief journey. They had both lost the same things: children, a business, a family wealth, and everything. But remember, and the Bible does tell us Job was a devout and upright man. And we have this wife that nothing is said about her. But you know, Edmund, if my husband is a devout and upright man, there must be something that is going on in the home that begins to support that being devout and upright. So we are not watching Bedside Baptist, we are going to church. This goat is for sacrificing because the children had a party yesterday. You know, and so you begin to see, I mean, in the normal family operations, remember also, when women get married, you're looking at, is there security in this home? Is this man able to provide for me and my children? And now all that is swept. All the kettle died, the children died. And this Job, who was a, a business honcho in all different spheres, now is sitting down, his body is covered with sores, and he's scratching himself with a broken pot.
And what a time. Let's take a break, because when you come back, you're identifying with Mrs. Job, speaking for the women. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Tell a friend to tune in. This is The Leader. We'll be back very shortly.
Yesu ndiye njia.
Mtoto gani katika hii ulimwengu ameitwa Mungu mkuu?
Nasema akasema audhu billahi.
Hata leo usisema audhu billahi, tafadhali usikize.
Yesu ndiye njia, uchambuzi wa masuala tata katika Biblia na vitabu vingine vya kidini.
We don't believe that Christ was crucified. Christ was taken right to heaven by 4 angels, 4 archangels.
Kama Muhammad ndiye alikuwa wa kwanza kuleta dini ya Kiislamu, na alikuja after Jesus, sasa inawezekanaje Ibrahimu awe Muislamu, Musa awe Muislamu?
Yesu ndiye njia, mjadala wa moja kwa moja kati ya walimu wa Kikristo na dini zingine.
Wanasema Mwenyezi Mungu ana mtoto. Jambo hilo wanasema mmeleta jambo ambalo linachukiza.
Siri ya Mungu ambaye Mungu amejidhihirisha katika mili, hii yote ni ukafiri.
Mmefanya makosa makubwa sana kusema kwamba Isa ibn Maryam ni Mungu wa pili na Allah ambaye ameumba mbingu na ardhi mkasema ni Mungu wa tatu.
Yesu ndiye njia, Jumamosi kuanzia saa 1:30 jioni kwenye runinga uipendayo ya Hope TV.
In order to keep hope alive in the airwaves, Hope Media has a couple of initiatives. Friends of Hope. Friends of Hope is you and I forming a team of well-wishers and volunteers who give in cash and kind to support in spreading the gospel at Hope Media. Currently, Hope Media is running a campaign under Friends of Hope dubbed 100 for 1. Through the campaign, Hope Media is asking Hope FM and Hope TV listeners and viewers to give just 100 shillings in order to reach one more soul with the message of hope and the gospel. Engage with us on our social media platforms at Hope FM Live and at Hope TV Kenya. Kuwa rafiki mso leo.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking to Mrs. Job.
So yeah, Mrs. Job, here he is, this business honcho man, this father of her children, now dead children, he's scratching himself he has sores all over his body, he's scratching himself with a pot, broken pot, you know? And she's like, this God we have been faithful to, why don't you just curse God and die? And I can hear the pain in her voice saying that, because they have been devout, they have served this God faithfully. And now, you remember me telling you about a miscarriage when I'm serving as a pastor? It's that whole disillusionment that, wait a minute, Lord, we have been faithful. What is this? You know, Hannah, The hunger for a baby, and Penina is having babies left, right, and center. And here you are, you're trying to have this one baby. And you remember Elkanah asking her, am I not worth more than 10 sons? Because Penina had 10 sons,
Yeah.
Hannah has none, and Elkanah is not understanding that for Hannah, as a woman in that community, as a woman in that society, to not have a child, what does that? It says you're not woman enough. Having a child is the most natural process.
And being a co-wife and others seem to have many, and you're wondering what's
wrong with me?
Yeah.
So you're obviously the problem is not Elkanah.
Mhm.
So it's me. It's me who's and so we see Anna's desperation for a baby. Another one of in fact, this is a group. Remember when the disciples, when Jesus died, and the disillusionment, and when Jesus begins to appear to them, and they are wondering, they're walking with him, they walk from to Emmaus, and they're walking with him, and they're wondering, who is this guy? Because the disciples had been believing Jesus, and then he was hung on the cross like a common criminal, and they're sitting there and thinking,
It's not there anymore. How do we do
Betty
this?
Mechomeka. Let's go back to becoming fishers of men. Let's go and start finding out where our nets, because imeharibika.
Imeumana.
Kimeumana, kimeturamba. This deal is done. And because he had died and he had been buried, and one day, and so you begin to see the despondency in them. And even when he shows up and Thomas says,
Let me
touch.
See,
You
see,
know, and that's who we are as human beings. Those are real people and real experiences of loss and grief, and just the emotional responses to those things, and they're real. Rahab was your perfect example of a leader without a title, because Rahab was what we would call today a commercial sex worker, a woman who you didn't even want to be associated with
K
her.
Street.
The K Street of then. I wonder what they called it. Was it a street? But yeah, she, if someone comes and tells you, let me do this, let me become the hero, and her story is so. Kumbe, a person of that kind of repute can have empathy, can have wisdom, can have courage. And it doesn't end there. In Matthew, she appears in the lineage of
She's
Christ.
in the lineage. Yeah.
And I kind of want to believe that even when these things are happening, there's a sense of disbelief for Rahab that her family was protected because of her actions. Who would think that a family can be protected because of your daughter who is in Koinange Street? You would think, who is it to say? In fact, we don't even acknowledge them. They are the family shame. And now they become the route through which the family gets saved. And that's the thing about God. God has a way of turning around the things that we thought Betty Mechomeka, and turning them around into beautiful things. My own personal journey, because I lost a child, because I had a miscarriage, it was painful, and I'm not going to try and minimize that. It was painful, and it really, really did hurt. But here we are, 7 years later? And something beautiful was born out of it. Out of my pain, I became a grief therapist, because I now no longer know pain from a head posture. I now know pain from a heart posture. So I'm not a wounded healer because of what I know in my head. I'm a grief therapist because I'm a wounded healer. I found healing, and so I lead people to the path of healing.
There's this question, and I'm sure you've been asked. Why does God allow this to happen? I'll give my case. 22 years back, my dad passed on. I went through the motion with everybody else, but I couldn't find tears in my eyes. Even when we were burying him, I couldn't bring myself to cry, 2 years on, it hit me like a ton of bricks. 5 years back, our mom went to be the Lord, and those good supports, you were there and others. The whole scenario was captured. We always capture to immortalize the memories, the video, the speeches, the photos. For 2 years, I could see the album there, the DVDs, the movies, but every time I wanted to look to revisit, I would find and create excuses around it of other things to postpone. Until about several months back is when I just had the courage to now I can visit, I can view what was happening in me. So the question I was asking myself, first of all, is there a problem? Why do I, who claims to have been very close to his father, refuse to accept that he's not there? 2, why is it that God allowed it to happen? How do you respond to that?
I'll answer it in 2 parts before I get into the part of why God allows it to happen. I'll say this about grief. Grief is cumulative. And what happens, let me give you an example. If you have a basin that has rainwater, has collected rainwater, it usually has some residue at the bottom, some silted soil. And if it has stopped raining, it rests. So the water on top looks nice and clear, and the soil is at the bottom. You can actually see the distinction. And then it rains again, and all the silt at the bottom comes up, and now the water becomes muddy and murky. And now it's all brown water, it's not clear water anymore. That's what happens with grief. Grief is cumulative. If I've gone through a loss, I didn't deal with it well again. I go through another one, I don't deal with it again. I go through another one, I don't deal with it again. There'll be that one loss that will happen that will actually be like the straw that broke the camel's back, because I've been having so many unprocessed losses, and then this one loss happens and you begin to say, her job, she lost her job and she just sank into depression. But it's because these are the losses that I've been going through. I have not been processing. They have been piling up. And then when I lost my job, everything broke. So that's what happened. Grief is cumulative. Which therefore means if you navigate your losses as they happen, you sit down with them, you interrogate your emotions around them, you learn how to live with the loss, you explore the emotions, you see how it is impacting you, how it is shaping you, you offer yourself kindness even in that place of loss, and you give yourself what you need at that point in time. Sometimes we may not have people to give us what we need. We may have people who are supportive, but some losses are deep and private. So I may just be the one that needs to hug myself and tell my soul to carry forward. And so how I navigate one loss and another loss will be an indicator of how I will manage another loss in my life. Because as sure as the sun sets, loss will always come into our lives. That's about that. Why does God allow loss? One of the things that I have come to learn, both as a pastor and as a grief therapist, is that nowhere, Edmund, in the Bible are we expected to understand God. There is no expectation from God that we should understand him. In fact, somebody once said, for a human being to understand God is like an amoeba to understand a human being. Now, an amoeba is a single cell. A human being is millions of cells. An amoeba cannot comprehend that complexity. A human being cannot comprehend. As a human being, I acknowledge that I cannot comprehend the complexity of who God is. But what I do believe is what God says in his word. And what does his word say? His word says that he has a plan for good for me and not for evil. A plan to give me a future and a hope. So even when he allows bad things to happen in my life, it's not because he did not see it coming, or, I usually say this, Edmund. God is not like a woman in the kitchen or a man in the kitchen boiling milk. And you know, we still don't know nini usumbua maziwa, because when you're boiling milk, you're looking at it, it is not boiling. But the minute you turn your face away like this,
That's when it rises, boils over.
Now,
Yeah.
when our lives seemingly boil over, God did not turn his face and look back and say, hiya, Edmund's father has died. No, God is not random. The Bible tells us that every day of my life, before it came to pass, God wrote it. In fact, the Bible says he ordained it in his book. Okay, so even the day your father died was a day that was ordained in the book of God. And there was sufficient grace for that day. You may not have felt it, you may not have sensed it, you may not have seen it, but grace had brought you that far, and grace has carried you this far.
And wow, we've only just begun. Can you imagine? Let's do this next week, same time. That has been the leader. You want to tell a friend? Tell a friend. We value and appreciate the privilege of your company. Pastor Mueni, authenticity coach, grief therapist, wife, mother, friend, and everything that goes with it. Asante sana. We'll see you here next week, same time. God bless. I'm Edmund Mudibo.